Lawyers and close friends Ksenia Bobkova and Julia Zagonek launched a members-only club for Russians working in the City of London 10 years ago. As more Russians moved to London, their club grew, and now it has 2,500 members. As part of our series on Russians in London, I invited them into the studio and started by asking Ksenia what brought her to London in the first place.
At the first place, as many other Russians, I came to study here. I actually spent 4 years in Scotland and then ended up in London.
What were you studying?
I was reading law, and then I pursued my career in law as a lawyer since 2001.
And you stayed, you married, what happened?
As a lot of people who study here, they go and try to gain some working experience, and that's what I did. I trained as a UK solicitor, and later on, just life turned in such a way that I set up my own business, and I've been here since.
So you're fully settled into English life?
Yes, I think after having a child here, I realized that I'm pretty much settled into the English life, yes.
Julia, what about you? How did you end up in London?
I came to England in the early 90s in 91. Unlike Ksenia, I didn't do law straight away. I did a history of art degree at the Courtauld Institute. I then decided to change the direction that my life was taking and requalified into law. And I'm also an English solicitor like Ksenia is, and pursuing that since 2001.
And you've settled here as well? You're not planning to leave anytime soon?
I have settled here. I have an English husband. I am travelling a lot. I will be spending some time in Moscow in the near future. I've actually spent 7 months last year in Moscow.
Why did you decide to set up your Russians in the City Association? Ksenia, I understand it's a members-only society for Russians who work in the City of London. What made you think we've got to set up some kind of association for all these people?
We started off very informally, and it was just a natural growth from the university years and transition into the professional world. And then as the community grew over the years, we realized that there is a need to bring all these people together and give them an opportunity to network, to develop professionally, and fundamentally just help each other.
When you started, was the association quite small?
The first gathering was really small, but it grew like a snowball, and within the first 6 months we had hundreds of people joining in. But the base of the community stays at approximately 2,500 people.
Is that because it's only a certain section of the community in London, Julia?
In terms of the community as a whole, the largest segment are people working in banks in various capacities. There are obviously lots of consultants working for the Big Four. We have strict membership criteria. It is an organisation for Russian-speaking professionals who work in finance, in the legal sector. So whilst we know that there are many talented individuals from Russia and former Soviet Union who do all sorts of other things that are very interesting, our community focuses on a particular segment of Russian-speaking society.
But you do support the arts, really, don't you, the Russian arts in London?
Absolutely. We have a calendar where we gather all the Russia-related events.
Could you pick out a couple of highlights that are coming up in March in the cultural calendar? Ksenia?
March is very busy indeed. It starts with Poet and Grazdanin readings by Yefremov.
The citizen poet.
Citizen poet. Then there is Zemfira on the 15th, Zemfira concert.
Then the Russian pop star. I'm just explaining because we have a British audience who
Absolutely.
might not. Is there anything for people who don't speak Russian?
They can try the DT concert, which is probably best without words, as it's great music by Shevchuk, the very famous rock star of a great standing. And then coming up at the end of March, there is Pavlova Gala. This is ballet.
The Anna Pavlova Gala at the Colosseum. Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's early April is the Eifman Ballet from St. Petersburg, which is a very big event.
That's modern ballet, isn't it? I'm not sure if they've been here before.
I think it's their first tour, and it's organized on a very high level, and everyone looking forward to this quite extended. I think there are 3 or 4 performances they're bringing from St. Petersburg.
So I suppose with about 300,000 Russians in London, there are no problems selling tickets to events.
300,000 is a very interesting figure, which could be discussed at length, as it is a mysterious number. No one knows what is the number of the Russian speakers, but I think, there is enough people who would join in such events, whether it's ballet, drama, whether it's the rock performances or classical music. There is very ripe Russian audience here. But events like Eifman Ballet, that would be of interest, of course, to the English-speaking audiences as well, as Современник last year showed.
The Современник Theatre.
Современник Theatre in January 2011, which had, I would say, at least 50% English-speaking audience, sold to the English-speaking audience.
And how do you see the future, Julia? Do you want to change your organisation? Do you see it ever becoming obsolete or just expanding?
Well, we expand with our members. So our members have grown in the past 10 years. Ksenia and I have seen people from junior positions growing to become partners in major law firms, to become president of various divisions in banks, people owning their own business. Ksenia is an example herself. And so we see, at the moment, we have quite a broad membership, and there's a large segment of junior people within our organisation, but quite a sizable, although smaller segment of senior people. And we see that naturally the senior segment will expand as our organisation develops, and we, in a sense, always respond to our members' needs and aspirations, and we grow with that. So as the Russian community grows within the segment that we operate in, at Russians in the City, we will be changing with it. We will be looking at how we can make Russians in the City more useful to our members. And obviously, it'll never be static. We're working on a number of projects, including charitable projects, and we are going to be growing, that's for sure.
And lastly, I'd like to go back to a more personal note. I'm just curious, as you've been here quite a long time, are there any particular things you miss about home, Julia?
Yes, I miss a lot of things about home, but there would be things that anybody would miss about any country they've spent their childhood in. And I think that many Russians, and not just Russians, many people nowadays have become citizens of the world. So in a sense, you're brought up in one country, you spend a significant amount of time in another. I think what I miss is the variety. Russia is an extremely cultural society, or it used to be when I was growing up. I miss Russian nature. We all travel extensively in the West, but many of us don't know our own country very well because we haven't travelled as extensively around Russia as most of us have around other countries. So I'm hoping in the next few years to get to know my country again and perhaps travel more around Russia as opposed to other countries. We must also understand that when you live in a different country, you change. We are Russians, but we are not the Russians who live in Russia, because whether or not we wanted to do that, whether or not it was a conscious effort, we do change. Our mentality changes, our outlook on life changes.
Ksenia, that's a very interesting point. Can you think of anything that's changed in yourself?
I think it was very obvious, it came very obvious to me when I started reading children's books to my 3-year-old daughter, and I realized that in some ways I'm trying to pass on to her my childhood, which took place some time ago. So in some ways this is very sad, but it's the country which was left behind 20 years ago, 30 years ago for some. And it changed, we changed. So in some ways we're very lucky that it's very easy to travel back and forth and keep the connections strong, whether through work, through personal life, whether in Moscow or in Russia itself or in London. So in that sense, it's not as difficult and tragic as it was 20 years ago when people left and that was the end of the story. But as Julia pointed out, life moves on, the country moves on. So,
is there anything particular you miss about your home country?
I wouldn't say there is anything particular, but it's a different planet, and there is no way to reconcile life in England and in Russia. And I enjoy being on this planet as well as I enjoy very much having the background from another planet.
So Russia's still one of those countries that stayed true to itself in a way, isn't it? It's not like going to just another European capital. You really feel the difference when you visit.
Think there is a substantial difference. Historically, it developed, and it's going to take quite some time before Russia would be culturally the same, business-wise the same as European country. For example, it is a developing country by all means. It's more alike to a developing country which has a different dynamics. It's much more dynamical in business, in personal relationships as well. So I wouldn't never compare it to a European country to begin with. So in that sense, you would find it very difficult to compare the rhythm of life in London and in Moscow. At the same time, it's probably more like comparing Moscow and Sao Paulo. But then you have the problem of the climate, and you can't compare people who are in Sao Paulo with the people in a traffic jam in Moscow when it's -30. So it's just different planets. Of people who study here, they go and try to gain some working experience, and that's what I did. I trained as a UK solicitor, and later on, just life turned in such a way that I set up my own business. Came to study here. I actually spent 4 years in Scotland and then ended up in London.
What were you studying?
I was reading law, and then I pursued my career in law as a lawyer since 2001.
And you stayed, you married, what happened?
As a lawyer...
Oh, it has 2,500 members. As part of our series on Russians in London, I invited them into the studio and started by asking Ksenia what brought her to London in the first place.
At the first place, as many other Russians, I've been here since.
So you're fully settled into English life?
Yes, I think after having a child here, I realized that I'm pretty much settled into the English life, yes.
Yulia, what about lawyers and close friends? Ksenia Bobkova and Yulia Zagonek launched a members-only club for Russians working in the City of London 10 years ago. As more Russians moved to London, their club grew, and now